Elizabeth Wilson stood in her kitchen arranging finger sandwiches on a silver platter that had been her mother's. The morning light streamed through the windows of her modest colonial home in Winchester, a quiet suburb just north of Boston. At 68, she still moved with the grace of the college swimmer she'd once been, though her honey blonde hair had faded to a soft silver she no longer bothered to color. $2,400, she murmured, reviewing the catering receipt on the counter. For one afternoon. But it wasn't just any afternoon, it was Ethan's high school graduation party. Her only grandson was heading to college in the fall, and Michael had insisted they needed something nice for his boy. Beth, as everyone called her, smiled ruefully at the thought. When was the last time Ethan had called her? 6 months ago, maybe longer. And Stephanie, her daughter-in-law, had been giving her the cold shoulder since Beth had refused to co-sign their loan for a Bermuda vacation last winter. Richard would have never allowed this, she said to the empty kitchen. Her husband had been gone 8 years now, his heart giving out one ordinary Tuesday morning while he was tying his shoes. One moment planning their retirement. The next, she was a widow with a substantial life insurance payout and a newfound purpose helping her son's family. The doorbell chimed, interrupting her thoughts. The catering staff had arrived to collect the food for the party. Beth greeted them with a warm smile, her natural hospitality taking over as she directed them to the platters and boxes she'd prepared. "Mrs. Wilson, this all looks lovely," said the young woman in charge. "The graduates will be impressed." "Just one graduate," Beth corrected gently. "My grandson." "Well, he's very lucky to have you," the woman replied carefully, loading the last of the desserts into an insulated carrier. Lucky. Beth considered the word as she watched the catering van pull away. Was Ethan lucky to have her? He certainly benefited from her generosity, the private tutoring she'd paid for throughout high school, the sports equipment, the graduation party, and now the hefty deposit for his freshman dorm at Boston College. Beth glanced at her watch. She'd promised to arrive early to help set up, and Stephanie had specifically requested she wear her blue dress because it photographed better. Beth smoothed her hands over the navy silk as she checked her reflection. The dress had cost more than she usually spent on herself these days, but she wanted to look her best for the photographs, if she was included in any. She locked her front door, her mind drifting back to Richard. They'd built a good life together, not extravagant, but comfortable. He'd been fastidious about their finances, insuring himself heavily to make sure she'd be taken care of. Just in case, he'd always said, as if sensing he might leave her too soon. The life insurance had been substantial enough for Beth to maintain her modest lifestyle indefinitely if she was careful. Instead, over the past 8 years, it had slowly drained away into Michael and Stephanie's perpetually overextended lives. It started small after Richard's death. Michael's contracting business was new, cash flow was tight, and Beth was grieving, grateful for the distraction of being needed. A small loan here, an unexpected bill there, but the pattern had grown, expanded. Now, 8 years later, Beth realized with a start that she couldn't remember the last time she'd spent money on herself for something that wasn't absolutely necessary. The weight of this realization sat heavily on her shoulders as she drove the short distance to Newton, where Michael and Stephanie had purchased a house they couldn't quite afford in one of Boston's most desirable suburbs. A house with a mortgage that Beth had been quietly paying for the past 3 years. Beth arrived at Michael and Stephanie's colonial revival an hour before the party was set to begin. The front lawn was perfectly manicured, the flower beds bursting with early summer blooms that Beth knew Stephanie had hired a landscaper to plant and maintain. She parked her modest Toyota on the street rather than in the circular driveway, knowing from experience that Stephanie preferred guests not to see her mother-in-law's aging vehicle. Beth gathered her purse and the small gift bag containing a $500 gift card to Best Buy for Ethan. For college tech, she'd written on the card, and made her way to the backyard. The space had been transformed. White lights strung between trees cast a magical glow even in daylight. Tables draped in navy and gold Ethan's school colors dotted the expansive lawn. A bar had been set up on the patio, and Michael was at the grill looking relaxed in khaki shorts and a polo shirt that stretched across his thickening middle. "Mom, you're here?" Michael glanced up, briefly flipping burgers with practiced ease. There was no warmth in his greeting, no movement to embrace her. "Can you handle the drinks table? Stephanie has a whole system." Of course she did. Beth nodded, swallowing the small hurt. "Happy to help. Where is Stephanie?" As if summoned, her daughter-in-law appeared from inside the house, clipboard in hand, Her blonde highlights freshly done, her slender figure showcased in white capri pants and a navy blouse. At 42, Stephanie Anderson still turned heads, a fact she was well aware of. "Beth, there you are. The drinks need arranging according to this chart." She thrust a color-coded diagram at Beth without making eye contact. "The caterers are setting up the food. I need to make sure they're doing it correctly." And just like that, Beth was dismissed to her post by the drinks table. 20 minutes later, she'd arranged the beverages exactly to Stephanie's specifications, wondering when exactly she'd become the hired help at her own grandson's party. The guests started arriving around noon. Family friends, Ethan's classmates, and their parents' neighbors. Beth watched from her assigned post as people complimented Stephanie on the beautiful party. She smiled and thanked them graciously, never once mentioning who had actually paid for it all. That should have been Beth's first clue. Ethan, tall and handsome like his father had been at 18, moved through the crowd with easy confidence. He was the star quarterback on the football team, had decent grades thanks to the tutors Beth had paid for, and was popular. He acknowledged Beth with a quick wave, but didn't approach. When it came time for Ethan to open his gifts, everyone gathered on the patio. Beth stood at the back of the crowd watching as her grandson tore through envelopes and boxes, accepting congratulations with practiced charm. When he opened Beth's gift card, he glanced at it briefly. "Oh, cool. Thanks, Grandma Beth." Then he tossed it aside to open the next present. No hug, no real acknowledgement, just the bare minimum politeness you'd show a distant acquaintance. Beth watched from her spot by the drinks table, refilling ice and pretending it didn't sting. When had her grandson stopped caring about her? When had she become just another obligation in his life? The answer came during Stephanie's speech. Stephanie stood on the patio steps, wineglass in hand, her voice carrying across the yard. "I just want to thank everyone for being here today to celebrate Ethan's achievement. Michael and I are so proud of the young man he's become, and we're grateful for all the support our family has given him." Our family. Not his grandmother, not the woman who'd paid for his private tutoring, his sports equipment, his graduation party. Our family. But it was what happened next that really opened Beth's eyes. Stephanie continued her speech, detailing all the people who'd made Ethan's success possible. She thanked his teachers, his coaches, his friends. She thanked Michael's boss for being flexible with his schedule. She even thanked the neighbors for being patient during Ethan's loud drum practice phase. She never mentioned Beth. Not once. Beth stood there watching the woman whose mortgage she'd been secretly paying for 3 years give a heartfelt speech about family support. And she realized something that probably should have occurred to her years earlier. She wasn't family to them. She was a service provider. The party continued around her, but Beth had stopped participating. She watched Stephanie hug Ethan, watched Michael beam with pride, watched relatives pat them both on the back for raising such a fine young man. Nobody looked Beth's way. Nobody seemed to notice she was there at all. As the afternoon wore on, Beth found herself doing mental math. The catering bill, the deposit for Ethan's freshman dorm, the monthly transfers to Michael and Stephanie's account that they thought she didn't know. They knew about the car insurance she paid for Ethan's Honda, the credit card bills she'd quietly handled when Michael's contracting business hit rough patches. By her calculations, Beth had invested approximately $47,000 in Ethan's life over the past 4 years alone. Apparently, that bought her the privilege of standing by the drinks table invisible and unacknowledged. The final straw came when Beth overheard Stephanie talking to her sister by the dessert table. "Thank God Ethan got into Boston College," Stephanie was saying. "The tuition is so much more reasonable than those private schools, and with Michael's income stabilizing, we should be able to handle it without too much stress." Her sister nodded sympathetically. "It's so expensive these days. How are you managing?" Stephanie lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Well, between you and me, Michael's mother helps out sometimes. Nothing major, but every little bit counts." Nothing major. 3 years of mortgage payments, thousands in emergency loans, Ethan's entire graduation party. Nothing major. Beth set down the pitcher she was holding and walked quietly to her car. Nobody noticed her leave. Why would they? The ATM had served its purpose for the day. That night, Beth sat in her kitchen with her laptop open, staring at her bank's auto-pay screen. Mortgage payment to Michael and Stephanie, $2,475 monthly. Car payment for Ethan's Honda, $378 monthly. Family cell phone plan, $240 monthly. Various credit card minimums for Michael's business expenses, $890 monthly. For 3 years, she'd been quietly covering 4 350s every month in expenses for a family that apparently didn't consider her part of their circle. Beth sipped her tea, her mind whirling with the realization of how much she'd allowed herself to be used. It wasn't just the money, though, that was substantial. It was the complete lack of acknowledgement, the casual dismissal of her contributions as nothing major, the way she'd been relegated to serving drinks at a party she had financed. She pulled up her bank statements for the past 5 years, methodically calculating the total she'd transferred to Michael's family. The number made her gasp: $287,000. Nearly $300,000 she'd given to people who'd just excluded her from the family. Beth poured herself a small glass of sherry, Richard's favorite, and tried to understand how she'd allowed this to happen. After Richard died, she'd been so lost, so desperate to still feel needed. Michael's family had filled that void, given her a purpose. She could help them in a way she'd never been able to help Richard in the end. But at what cost? Her retirement savings had stagnated. Her own home needed repairs she'd been postponing. She'd stopped traveling, stopped taking art classes, stopped doing anything that brought her joy because all her discretionary income went to Michael's family. As Beth was wrestling with these realizations, her phone buzzed with a notification. Michael had created a family group chat a year earlier, supposedly to keep everyone connected. Michael, Stephanie, Ethan, Michael's brother, James's wife, Hannah, and Beth. It was mostly used for sharing photos and coordinating holiday plans. But this message was different. Michael: "Hey everyone. Stephanie and I have been talking and we think it's time for some boundaries. Mom, we've decided you're no longer part of our immediate family unit. We need space to grow as a nuclear family without interference. Please respect our decision and don't come to future gatherings." Beth stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. Then she watched as one by one the reactions came in. Stephanie liked the message. James liked it. Hannah liked it. Even Ethan, her grandson, who she'd supported through 18 years of life, liked the message. For a moment, Beth felt like she couldn't breathe. The casual cruelty of it, delivered via text, endorsed by everyone. It was staggering. She'd just spent $2,400 on Ethan's graduation party that morning, a party where she'd been treated like hired help, and now this. Instead of the hurt or rage she might have expected to feel, Beth was overcome with a strange sense of clarity. For years, she'd been trying to buy her way into this family's affections, and they'd been happy to take her money while keeping her at arm's length. It ends now, she decided. Her fingers steady, she typed her response. "Thanks for confirming. I'll cancel all the auto payments." And then she did exactly that. Mortgage payment canceled. Car payment canceled. Cell phone plan canceled. Credit card auto pays all canceled. Every automatic transfer that had been quietly flowing from her account to theirs for years. By midnight, her phone had 47 missed calls and 73 text messages. The group chat had exploded with panic. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to the woman they'd just excluded from the family. But Beth was done talking. She turned off her phone and went to bed sleeping better than she had in years. Tomorrow would bring consequences. But tonight, for the first time in decades, Beth felt like she mattered again, even if it was just to herself. The pounding on Beth's front door started at 7:23 a.m. She knew the exact time because she was sitting at her kitchen table sipping coffee and watching the sunrise through her window when the sound shattered the peaceful morning. Through the peephole, she could see Michael's face, red and angry. Behind him stood Stephanie, arms crossed, looking like she was preparing for war. Beth considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of her. After all, 12 hours ago, she apparently wasn't family. Now here they were on her doorstep at dawn. "Mom, what the hell have you done?" Michael's voice cracked as she opened the door. Beth stepped back to let them in, noting how Stephanie pushed past her without so much as a greeting. They were both still in yesterday's clothes, looking like they hadn't slept. Good. Maybe they'd spent the night learning what real stress felt like. "I did exactly what you asked," Beth said calmly. "You wanted boundaries. You got them." Stephanie whirled around her carefully styled hair, now a mess. "You can't just cancel everything. Do you know what you've done?" Beth poured herself another cup of coffee, deliberately not offering them any. Let them stew in their panic while she enjoyed her morning routine. "I've respected your wishes," she said. "You said I'm not family, so I stopped acting like family." Michael slumped into her kitchen chair without invitation. "Mom, you don't understand. The mortgage payment is due tomorrow. If it doesn't go through—" "Then I suppose you'll need to make other arrangements," Beth interrupted. like actual adults do. The silence that followed was delicious. For years, she'd watched them take her financial support for granted, never once acknowledging the sacrifices she'd made to keep their lives comfortable. Now they were getting a taste of reality, and it was bitter medicine. Stephanie found her voice first. Beth, this is ridiculous. We had a family disagreement, but that doesn't mean you should destroy our financial stability. Oh, I think you're confused, Beth said, settling back into her chair. I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply no longer participating in your financial stability. There's a difference. The look that passed between Michael and Stephanie spoke volumes. They'd been counting on her money without ever actually asking for it, assuming her support was unconditional and eternal. Well, conditions had definitely changed. Look, Michael said, running his hands through his hair. Maybe we were harsh yesterday. We were emotional about Ethan leaving for college, worried about becoming empty nesters. We didn't mean to hurt you. Actually, you did, Beth replied. You meant every word. You just didn't expect consequences. Stephanie tried a different approach, her voice honey with fake concern. Beth, we're family. Family works through problems together. We don't abandon each other over misunderstandings. Beth almost laughed. The woman who'd liked a message excluding her from the family was now lecturing her about abandonment. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. You're right, Stephanie. Family doesn't abandon each other. So tell me, when exactly did you start considering me family again? Was it when you realized your mortgage payment was canceled, or when Ethan's car payment bounced? Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and paled. The bank's calling. They're asking about the missed payment. Better answer it, Beth suggested. Wouldn't want to damage your credit rating. As Michael stepped outside to take the call, Stephanie moved closer to Beth. Her mask of false sweetness finally slipped, revealing the calculating woman underneath. You can't do this to us, Beth. We have obligations. Ethan's tuition deposit is due next week. The mortgage, the car payments, the credit cards. You know we can't cover all of this alone. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before excluding me from your family circle, Beth said. Amazing how quickly circumstances can change your perspective, isn't it? Stephanie leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. What do you want, money and apology? What's it going to take to fix this? And there it was, the question that revealed everything about their relationship with Beth. In Stephanie's mind, she was a problem to be solved, a situation to be managed. She genuinely couldn't understand that this wasn't about negotiation. It was about dignity. I want you to leave, Beth said simply. Michael came back inside, his face ashen. They're starting foreclosure proceedings if we miss another payment. Mom, please, we need your help. No, Beth said, rising to her feet. You need my money. There's a difference. She walked to her front door, opening it meaningfully. I think we're done here. You have your boundaries, and I have mine. Stephanie's composure finally cracked completely. This is insane. You're destroying your own family over hurt feelings. I'm not destroying anything, Beth said. I'm just no longer rebuilding what you tear down every day. They left, but not before Stephanie turned back with one final threat. You'll regret this, Beth. When Ethan needs help with college, when Michael's business struggles, when we lose the house because of your selfishness, you'll regret it. Beth closed the door and locked it. Regret. The only thing she regretted was waiting so long to find her backbone. Her phone rang within minutes. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. Grandma Beth? His voice was small, uncertain. For the first time in months, he sounded like the little boy who used to spend weekends at her house. Dad says you're not helping with my car payment anymore. That's right, sweetheart. But I don't have a job yet. How am I supposed to make the payments? It was a fair question, and part of Beth ached hearing the confusion in his voice. But Ethan was 18 now, legally an adult, and yesterday he'd liked a message that cut her out of his life. I suppose you'll need to find employment, she said gently. Most college students work part-time to cover their expenses. This is because of that stupid group chat thing, isn't it, Grandma? I didn't mean anything by it. I was just, I don't know, going along with what everyone else was doing. And there was the truth that hurt most of all. He hadn't excluded her because he was angry or hurt. He'd done it because it was easier than standing up to his parents because she didn't matter enough to defend. Ethan, I love you. I always will. But loving someone doesn't mean enabling them to treat you badly. So you're punishing me because my parents are idiots? The question caught Beth off guard. Maybe Ethan understood more than she'd given him credit for. "I'm not punishing anyone," she said. "I'm teaching all of you that actions have consequences, that people, even grandmothers, have limits." After she hung up, Beth made herself a sandwich and sat down with a legal pad. If she was going to rebuild her life without being anyone's ATM, she needed a plan. First, she called her financial advisor, Margaret Chen. They'd worked together for 15 years, and Margaret had been diplomatically questioning Beth's family's financial dependence for at least 5 of those years. "Beth," she said warmly, "I saw some unusual account activity yesterday. Is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect, Margaret. I need to schedule a meeting to discuss redirecting some of my automatic payments, permanently." There was a pause. "The family support payments. All of them." Another pause. Then something that sounded suspiciously like relief in her voice. "How about tomorrow morning? I think we have a lot to discuss." That evening, Beth's phone rang every 20 minutes. Michael, Stephanie, Ethan, even James and Hannah calling to mediate the situation. She let them all go to voicemail. At 11 p.m., a new message appeared in the family group chat. "Michael, Mom, please call me back. We can work this out. I know we hurt you, but we're family. Family forgives. Family forgives. But family also respects. Family also appreciates. Family also considers each other's feelings before making unilateral decisions about who belongs and who doesn't." Beth typed back one final message. "Family is a two-way street. You'll figure out what that means when you're ready." Then she left the group chat entirely. For the first time in 3 years, she fell asleep without worrying about someone else's bills. It was a beautiful feeling. But something told her this was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning. Margaret Chen's office overlooked downtown Boston from the 23rd floor, all glass and chrome, with enough legal degrees on the wall to outfit a small law firm. Beth had always felt slightly intimidated by the setting, but this morning she walked in like she owned the place. Funny how cutting toxic people out of your life can improve your posture. "Beth, you look different," Margaret said, gesturing to the chair across from her mahogany desk. "Lighter somehow." $4 or $350 lighter every month, to be exact," Beth replied, settling in with her purse and the folder she'd prepared. "And yes, I feel wonderful." Margaret pulled up Beth's accounts on her computer, her expression growing more pleased with each screen. "I have to say, Beth, I've been hoping for this conversation for years. Your family's financial dependence has been concerning. Tell me exactly how concerning." She turned her monitor so Beth could see the numbers. "In the past 5 years, you've transferred approximately $287,000 to various family members. Your retirement savings growth has been stunted by constant withdrawals. At your current age, you should be accumulating wealth, not depleting it." Beth stared at the figure. $287,000. Almost $300,000 she'd given to people who just told her she wasn't family. "What would my net worth be if I hadn't made those transfers?" Margaret clicked through several screens running calculations. "Conservatively, you'd have about $840,000 more in your retirement accounts, with proper investment growth potentially over $1 million. $1 million. She'd essentially given away $1 million retirement to fund her family's lifestyle, and they'd repaid her by cutting her out of their lives. "Margaret, I want to make some changes. Big ones." Over the next hour, they restructured Beth's entire financial life. The mortgage payment money would now go into a high-yield savings account. The car payment money would fund a new travel fund. The family cell phone money would cover her own increased insurance and healthcare costs. But the credit card autopays presented an interesting opportunity. "These business expenses Michael's been charging," Margaret said, reviewing the statements. "Are you aware that some of these look questionable?" Beth leaned forward. "What do you mean? Restaurant charges at expensive steakhouses, golf course fees a weekend at a casino resort in Atlantic City. Either Michael's business involves a lot of entertainment, or he's been using your money for personal expenses." The betrayal cut deeper than she'd expected. Not only had they been taking her money for granted, they'd been misusing it. Michael had been living it up on her dime while telling everyone she helped out sometimes. "Margaret, I want you to have our attorney send a formal accounting request. I want to know exactly what Michael's been charging to those credit cards for the past 3 years. Are you considering legal action?" "I'm considering all my options." They spent another hour setting up new investment strategies, updating beneficiaries on her accounts, and discussing her long-term financial goals. For the first time in years, those goals didn't include supporting ungrateful adult children. As Beth was leaving, Margaret handed her a business card. "Beth, I'd like you to meet someone. Eleanor Hartwell. She's a personal coach who specializes in helping women reclaim their power after difficult family situations. I think you two would hit it off. Beth walked out of that building feeling like a different woman. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, the air cleaner. She had plans now, goals that didn't revolve around other people's needs. Her phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. Beth, Ethan's car was repossessed this morning. He's devastated. How could you do this to your own grandson? Beth stared at the message, waiting for the guilt to hit. Instead, she felt something unexpected relief. Ethan's car being repossessed meant he'd face real consequences for his choices. Maybe it would teach him something his parents clearly hadn't. She texted back, "Actions have consequences. Ethan will learn to make better choices." Her response was immediate. "You're a horrible grandmother." Beth almost replied with a list of everything she'd done for Ethan over the years, but stopped herself. She didn't owe Stephanie explanations anymore. She didn't owe any of them anything. Instead, she drove to Eleanor Hartwell's office for an impromptu consultation. Eleanor was about Beth's age, with silver hair and laugh lines that suggested she'd figured out how to enjoy life. Her office was warm and inviting, filled with plants and comfortable furniture that made you want to sink in and tell secrets. "Margaret called ahead," Eleanor said, offering Beth tea. "She said you're going through a family restructuring." "That's one way to put it. I prefer getting my life back." For the next hour, Beth told Eleanor everything: the years of silent support, the graduation party humiliation, the group chat exclusion, and her nuclear response. Eleanor listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Beth, let me ask you something," she said when Beth finished. "In all those years of supporting your family financially, did they ever express gratitude? Did they ever acknowledge what you were sacrificing for them?" Beth thought about it carefully. "No, never directly. It was always treated like it was just what I was supposed to do." "And when did you start believing that was your job?" The question hit Beth like a physical blow. When had she started believing that her value as a mother and grandmother was measured by her willingness to solve everyone's financial problems? "I think after Richard died," she said slowly. "Michael was struggling with his new business. Stephanie was pregnant with Ethan. They needed help, and I had life insurance money. It felt good to be needed." Being needed and being used are two different things. They talked for another 30 minutes about boundaries, self-worth, and the difference between helping and enabling. Eleanor gave Beth homework: write down every financial sacrifice she'd made for her family over the past 5 years, and beside each one note whether anyone had thanked her. As Beth drove home, her phone rang constantly. Michael, Stephanie, Ethan, James, Hannah, even some cousins she hadn't heard from in months. Word was spreading through the family grapevine that the Bank of Beth had closed. She let them all go to voicemail. That evening, she started her homework assignment. The list was longer than she'd expected, and the thank you column remained stubbornly empty. Page after page of financial support and not a single expression of genuine gratitude. But the exercise revealed something else, a pattern of escalating demands. It had started with small emergency loans and evolved into automatic monthly payments. They'd been conditioning her, gradually increasing their dependence until she was essentially funding their entire lifestyle. And she'd let it happen because being needed felt better than being alone. At 9:00 p.m., Michael showed up at her door again. This time he was alone, and he looked terrible. Exhausted, stressed, maybe even a little humbled. "Mom, can we talk, really talk?" Beth let him in, but she didn't offer coffee or try to make him comfortable. Those days were over. "Michael, before you say anything, I want you to know that I've had my attorney pull all the credit card statements. I know about the casino resort. I know about the golf club memberships. I know about the expensive dinners you've been charging to my account." His face went white. "Mom, I can explain." "No explanations necessary. I understand perfectly. You've been living a lifestyle you can't afford on my money, and you've been lying about it." He slumped into her sofa, looking like a man whose world was collapsing. Good. Maybe it needed to collapse. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. "I want you to grow up. I want you to take responsibility for your choices. And I want you to stop treating me like an ATM with gray hair. And if I do that, if I change, if I make things right, will you help us again?" Beth looked at her son, this middle-aged man who still wanted Mommy to solve his problems, and she felt a strange mixture of love and disappointment. Michael, that's exactly the wrong question. You're still thinking about what you can get from me instead of what you can give back to this relationship." He sat there for a long moment processing. Then surprisingly, his shoulders began to shake. Her successful grown son started crying right there on her couch. "I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know how to pay the mortgage or keep Ethan in school or save my marriage. I've been depending on your money for so long I forgot how to handle things myself." It was the first honest thing he'd said to her in years. But honesty, Beth was learning, doesn't automatically earn forgiveness. It just makes the conversation more productive. "Then you'd better start remembering," she said gently, "because I'm done being your safety net." After he left, Beth sat in her quiet house and realized something important. She wasn't angry anymore. She was disappointed and she was determined, but she wasn't angry. She was just done being taken for granted. For the first time in years, Beth felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Free, independent, and in control of her own story. She thought of Margaret's advice and Eleanor's guidance, and she knew that whatever came next, whether reconciliation or permanent estrangement, she would face it on her own terms. She'd spent too long being defined by what she could give. Now it was time to discover who she was beyond that, not just Michael's mother, or Ethan's grandmother, or Richard's widow, but Elizabeth Wilson. A woman with her own dreams, her own life, her own value. And that was worth more than any amount of money. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Margaret Chen's office, casting thin golden stripes across her mahogany desk. Beth sat with perfect posture in the leather chair, a stark contrast to her usual slightly hunched demeanor. She'd chosen her outfit carefully today, a crisp navy pantsuit she hadn't worn since Richard's funeral, paired with pearl earrings he'd given her on their 25th anniversary. "Let's review your financial situation in detail," Margaret said, turning her computer screen so Beth could see it. "I've prepared a comprehensive report of your transfers to Michael's family over the past 5 years. The spreadsheet displayed on the screen told a devastating story in columns and rows. Regular monthly payments, emergency loans, educational expenses, medical bills, vacations disguised as family bonding opportunities. All neatly categorized, all flowing in one direction, out of Beth's accounts and into her son's family's pockets. The total is even worse than we initially calculated." Margaret said, her voice gentle but firm. "With interest factored in, you've transferred $312,000 to various family members since Richard's death." Beth stared at the number, trying to reconcile it with the group chat message that had declared her no longer part of the immediate family unit. "And if I had invested that money instead?" she asked, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. Margaret clicked to another screen displaying a projection graph. "Conservatively assuming moderate market growth and compounding interest, you would have approximately $840,000 more in your retirement accounts today." The line on the graph climbed steadily upward, representing the alternate reality where Beth had prioritized her own financial security. "With more aggressive investments, that figure could be well over $1 million. Margaret continued, clicking to show another projection. $1 million. The weight of that number settled on Beth's shoulders. Not just the amount itself, but what it represented. Trips she hadn't taken, classes she hadn't enrolled in, a retirement that would now be far less comfortable than it should have been. All sacrificed for a family that excluded her with a text message. "I feel like such a fool," Beth whispered, her composure finally cracking. Margaret reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "You're not a fool, Beth. You're a mother who loved too generously. But there's something else we need to discuss." She pulled up another screen showing credit card statements, the business expenses Beth had been automatically paying for Michael's contracting company. "I had my team review these charges in detail," Margaret said, "and there are serious irregularities." Beth leaned forward, studying the highlighted items. Restaurant charges at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, green fees at the Brayburn Country Club weekend, getaways to Atlantic City, tickets to Celtics games listed as client entertainment. "Michael doesn't have clients who would need entertaining at Celtics games," Beth said slowly as realization dawned. "His business is residential renovation." "Exactly." Margaret's voice took on a harder edge. "He's been using the business credit card you've been paying for personal expenses, not occasionally but systematically." As Margaret scrolled through the statements, the pattern became undeniable. Expensive dinners with just 2 people, Michael and Stephanie, spa packages, designer clothing stores categorized as office supplies, even a 1-200 charge to a jewelry store on Stephanie's birthday. This isn't just taking advantage of your generosity, Margaret said carefully. This could potentially constitute financial fraud. Beth felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. What are my options? First, we stop all payments immediately, which you've already done. Second, we document everything. Third, I recommend we bring in Patricia Morse. A lawyer? Beth's stomach tightened. Not just any lawyer. Patricia specializes in elder financial abuse cases. I'm not sure I would call this abuse. Beth. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. What would you call it if you heard this story from a friend, a family systematically draining an elderly parent's resources while excluding them from family life, using their funds for luxury purchases under false pretenses? What would you call that? Beth was silent for a long moment. I'd call it exploitation. Exactly, and now that you've cut off the money, there's a risk they might escalate. We need to protect you. Beth thought of Stephanie's parting threat. You'll regret this, Beth. You think they might retaliate. It's common in these situations, Margaret said carefully. When the financial support stops, some families try other tactics to regain control, including claiming the elderly parent is mentally incompetent or being unduly influenced. The thought of Michael and Stephanie attempting to take legal control of her finances sent a chill down Beth's spine. Make the appointment with Patricia. There's something else, Margaret said, handing Beth a business card. This is Eleanor Hartwell. She's a personal coach who specializes in helping women reclaim their power after family difficulties. She might be able to help you navigate the emotional aspects of this situation. Beth tucked the card into her purse. You've been waiting a long time to have this conversation with me, haven't you? Margaret smiled ruefully. 5 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Not that I've been counting. For the first time in days, Beth laughed. Why didn't you say something sooner? I tried, Beth, gently, but you weren't ready to hear it. Financial advisors walk a fine line between offering guidance and respecting client autonomy. You had to come to this realization yourself. They spent the next hour restructuring Beth's finances. The money previously earmarked for Michael's mortgage would now go into a high-yield emergency fund. The car payment funds would be redirected to a travel account. The family cell phone money would boost Beth's healthcare savings. What about the business credit card payments? Beth asked. Margaret's expression hardened. Those funds will go into a separate account pending legal advice. If Patricia determines there was fraud involved, that documentation will be important. By the time Beth left Margaret's office, she had a new financial plan, 2 appointments, one with Patricia Morse and one with Eleanor Hartwell, and something she hadn't felt since Richard died, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with rescuing her son's family. As she stepped out onto the sunlit Boston street, her phone chimed with a text from Stephanie. Beth Ethan's car was repossessed this morning. He's devastated. How could you do this to your own grandson? Beth stared at the message, waiting for the wave of guilt to crash over her. Instead, she felt an unexpected sense of relief. Ethan's car being repossessed was a natural consequence of his choices, and hers. Maybe this would teach him something about responsibility that his parents had failed to instill. She typed back, actions have consequences. Ethan will learn to make better choices. The response was immediate. You're a horrible grandmother. Beth slid her phone back into her purse without replying. 3 days ago, those words would have devastated her. Today, they simply confirmed she was on the right path. Instead of going home, she drove directly to Eleanor Hartwell's office. The building was less imposing than Margaret's downtown high-rise, a converted Victorian in Cambridge with stained glass windows and a small garden out front. It felt welcoming, which was exactly what Beth needed. Eleanor herself matched the building, warm, approachable, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob and laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she'd lived a life filled with joy despite its challenges. Margaret called ahead, Eleanor said, ushering Beth into an office filled with plants and comfortable furniture. She mentioned you're going through what she diplomatically called a family restructuring. That's one way to put it, Beth replied, settling into a comfortable armchair. I prefer getting my life back. For the next hour, Beth poured out her story. The years of financial support, the graduation party humiliation, the group chat exclusion, and her decision to cut off all funding. Eleanor listened attentively, occasionally asking questions, but never interrupting Beth's flow. When Beth finished, Eleanor leaned forward. Tell me something, Beth. In all those years of supporting your family financially, did they ever express genuine gratitude? Did they acknowledge the sacrifices you were making? Beth thought carefully. No, not really. It was always treated as expected, as if it was my job to solve their financial problems. And when did you start believing that was your role? The question hit Beth like a physical blow. When had she started seeing herself primarily as a financial resource rather than a person deserving of respect and appreciation? I think after Richard died, she said slowly. Michael was struggling with his business. Stephanie was pregnant with Ethan. They needed help, and I had the life insurance money. Being needed, it filled a void. Being needed and being used are two very different things, Eleanor said gently. One feeds your soul, the other depletes it. Beth nodded, feeling the truth of those words resonate in her body. I've been depleted for years. I just didn't recognize it. That's why you're here now. You're ready to refill your own well. Eleanor gave Beth an assignment before their next meeting document every financial sacrifice she'd made for her family over the past 5 years, and beside each entry note, whether anyone had expressed gratitude or acknowledgement. As Beth drove home, her phone rang repeatedly. Michael, Stephanie, Ethan, James, Hannah. Even relatives she rarely spoke to. Word was clearly spreading through the family grapevine that the Bank of Beth had permanently closed. She let every call go to voicemail. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad methodically working through Eleanor's assignment. Line after line of financial support, from the $25,000 down payment on Michael and Stephanie's house to the $60 monthly app subscription for Ethan's gaming habit. The gratitude column remained stubbornly empty, but the exercise revealed something else, a pattern of escalating demands. What had begun as occasional emergency help had evolved into regular expected payments, which had then expanded to include luxury items and personal indulgences disguised as necessities. They had been conditioning her, gradually increasing their dependence, or rather their exploitation, until she was funding their entire lifestyle, all while treating her as an outsider in the family she was supporting. At 9:00 p.m., her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Michael standing alone on her porch, looking haggard in the yellow porch light. Beth hesitated, then opened the door. She'd spent years rushing to solve Michael's problems. Tonight she would simply listen. "Mom," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Can we really talk?" Beth stepped back, allowing him into her home, but not offering refreshments or fussing over him as she normally would. Those days were over. "Before you say anything," she said calmly, "I want you to know that I've had my financial advisor review all the credit card statements. I know about the casino resort in Atlantic City. I know about the golf club memberships. I know about the expensive dinners you've been charging to my account." Michael's face drained of color. "Mom, I can explain." "No explanations necessary. I understand perfectly. You've been living a lifestyle you can't afford on my money, and you've been lying about it." He sank onto her sofa, looking like a man watching his world collapse. Good. Maybe it needed to collapse before something honest could be rebuilt. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. "I want you to grow up. I want you to take responsibility for your choices. And I want you to stop treating me like an ATM with gray hair. And if I do that, if I change, if I make things right, will you help us again?" Beth studied her son, this middle-aged man who still expected his mother to solve his problems, and felt a strange mixture of love and disappointment. "Michael, that's exactly the wrong question. You're still thinking about what you can get from me, not what you can give to this relationship." He sat in silence for a long moment, then his shoulders began to shake. To Beth's shock, her successful grown son started crying on her couch. "I don't know how to fix this, Mom," he choked out between sobs. "I don't know how to pay the mortgage or keep Ethan in school or save my marriage. I've been depending on your money for so long I forgot how to handle things myself." It was the first honest thing he'd said to her in years. But honesty, Beth was learning, doesn't automatically earn forgiveness. It just makes the conversation more productive. "Then you'd better start remembering," she said gently, "because I'm done being your safety net." After he left, Beth sat in her quiet house and realized something important. She wasn't angry anymore. She was disappointed and she was determined, but the anger had dissipated. She was simply done being taken for granted. Patricia Morse's law office occupied half a floor in a historic building near Boston Common. Unlike Margaret's sleek corporate setting, or Eleanor's homey Victorian Patricia's space projected quiet authority, understated elegance with subtle power, like its owner. Patricia herself was in her mid-50s with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses and the calm confidence of someone who had seen it all and wasn't easily rattled. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, extending her hand, "I've reviewed the financial documents Margaret sent over. Please have a seat and tell me what you hope to accomplish." Beth settled into the visitor's chair, appreciating Patricia's directness. "I want to protect myself from potential retaliation, and I want to understand my options regarding the money that's already gone." Patricia nodded, making a brief note. "Let's start with protection. Based on what I've seen, there's a significant risk that your son and daughter-in-law might attempt to challenge your competence." "You mean claim I'm senile?" The thought was both absurd and terrifying. "Not in those terms, but essentially yes. When an elderly parent suddenly changes established financial patterns, especially when those patterns benefited adult children, a common tactic is to suggest the parent is being manipulated or is experiencing cognitive decline." Beth thought of how easily they'd excluded her from the family via text message. Would they really go so far as to try to take control of her finances? What can we do to prevent that? First, we document your cognitive health. I recommend a full neuropsychological evaluation with a geriatric specialist. Establish baseline cognitive functioning that can't be disputed later. Beth nodded, making a note. Second, we prepare documentation of the systematic financial exploitation. Margaret has already done excellent work there. And third, we consider a preemptive legal strategy. What kind of strategy? Patricia leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Wilson, based on the records I've reviewed, you have grounds for a civil suit against your son and daughter-in-law for elder financial exploitation." The words hung in the air between them. A lawsuit against Michael. The thought made Beth's stomach clench. "I don't know if I want to sue my son." "I understand," Patricia said, her voice softening slightly. "But filing a complaint doesn't mean we have to pursue it to judgment. Sometimes the documentation itself provides protection. It establishes that you were the one being taken advantage of, not the other way around." She pulled out a folder and extracted several pages of bank statements with highlighted entries. These charges to high-end restaurants, golf courses, and weekend getaways, all labeled as business expenses but clearly personal in nature. These alone constitute a pattern of misrepresentation and financial exploitation. If they try to challenge your competence, having this documented would be a powerful counterargument. Beth studied the statements, seeing the evidence of Michael and Stephanie's deception laid out in black and white. Steakhouse dinners on Valentine's Day labeled as client meetings. Spa weekends categorized as business conferences. A $2,800 charge to a jewelry store listed as office equipment. "I was so blind," she murmured. "You weren't blind, Mrs. Wilson. You were trusting. There's a difference." Patricia outlined a 3-part strategy document Beth's cognitive health prepare evidence of financial exploitation and draft a cease and desist letter warning against any attempts to challenge Beth's competence. "We won't file anything yet," Patricia assured her, "but we'll be prepared if they escalate." As Beth left the office with a folder of papers to review and several appointments to schedule, her phone chimed with a text from Michael. "Mom, we need to talk. Stephanie and I have consulted an attorney about options to help you through this difficult time." Beth felt a chill run down her spine. They were moving faster than she'd anticipated. She forwarded the message to Patricia, who responded almost immediately. "Do not meet with them. Do not respond. Come back to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. That evening, Beth met Susan Williams for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Winchester. They'd reconnected at Linda's funeral a week earlier, and something about Susan's straightforward manner and similar experiences with family dynamics had resonated with Beth. "They're already talking to lawyers," Beth said after they'd ordered, showing Susan the text. Susan, elegant at 65 with silver-streaked dark hair and knowing eyes, shook her head. "Classic move. When manipulation fails, they try intimidation." "Did your son do something similar when you refused to co-sign for his boat?" "Oh, honey," Susan laughed, swirling her wine glass. "He went straight to my brother, claiming I was showing signs of instability and suggesting they look into my finances for my own protection." "What did you do?" "I bought myself a beautiful little sailboat that I keep at the marina in Plymouth," Susan said with a wicked smile. "Every weekend I post pictures of myself sailing with my new friends. My son doesn't ask for money anymore." Beth laughed, then sobered. "I'm not sure I can be that bold." "Sure you can." Susan reached across the table and squeezed Beth's hand. "You already have been, cutting off the money flow that took courage. The rest is just details. I keep wondering if I'm overreacting, Beth confessed. Maybe it was just a family disagreement that got out of hand. Susan's expression grew serious. Beth, they excluded you from the family via text message, then immediately panicked when the money stopped flowing. That's not a disagreement. That's exploitation meeting consequences. Over pasta and a second glass of wine, they made plans to visit a museum exhibit the following weekend. Beth's first social outing that wasn't family-related in longer than she could remember. The next morning, Beth returned to Patricia's office to find the attorney looking grimmer than before. "We need to move quickly," Patricia said without preamble. "Your son and daughter-in-law have consulted with Jameson and Burke." "Who are they?" "A law firm that specializes in conservatorship cases. They help families gain legal control over elderly relatives' finances." Beth felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "They're really going to try to take control of my money." "It appears so. But we're going to stop them." Patricia pushed a document across the desk. "This is the complaint we discussed yesterday documenting the financial exploitation. I recommend we file it immediately as a protective measure." Beth stared at the legal document, its formal language laying out in clinical terms how her son and daughter-in-law had systematically taken advantage of her financially. Filing it would make the private betrayal public, would formalize the breach in their relationship in a way that might be irreparable. "Is there no other way?" she asked quietly. Patricia's expression softened slightly. "We could wait, see if they actually file for conservatorship, but that puts us in a reactive position. Filing this complaint first establishes you as the wronged party and makes their potential filing look retaliatory." Beth took a deep breath. "How long do I have to decide?" "Honestly, hours, not days. Based on their choice of counsel, they're moving aggressively." Beth thought of Michael crying on her couch, of Ethan's confusion over the car being repossessed, of Stephanie's cold manipulation. She thought of years of financial support treated as an expectation rather than a gift. She thought of the group chat message, "You are no longer part of our immediate family unit." "File it," she said firmly. "And then call Margaret Chen. I want to make some changes to my will and beneficiary designations." Patricia nodded, already reaching for her phone. "I'll have my paralegal begin the filing process immediately. And Mrs. Wilson, you're doing the right thing." Beth wasn't so sure about that, but she was certain she was doing the necessary thing. As Patricia made calls and her staff began processing paperwork, Beth sat quietly, letting the reality of her situation sink in. She was suing her son for elder financial abuse. The same son she'd rocked to sleep as a colicky baby, taught to ride a bike, cheered for at countless baseball games, helped move into his first apartment. The son who now saw her as a financial resource to be exploited rather than a mother to be cherished. When had it all gone so wrong? Beth's phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Ethan." She hesitated, then answered. "Grandma Beth?" His voice sounded smaller than usual, uncertain. "Hello, Ethan. I wanted to talk to you about everything that's happening." He paused. "Not about the money or the car or whatever. Just, I wrote you a letter. Can I bring it by later?" The request caught her off guard. A letter, in this age of texts and social media. "Of course, sweetheart." "Thanks. I'll come by around 4 if that's okay." After hanging up, Beth shared the development with Patricia. "Be cautious," the attorney advised. "It's not uncommon for family members to use one person, often someone the elderly individual has a soft spot for, to try to reestablish influence. You think they're using Ethan to manipulate me? It's possible. Or he could genuinely want to make amends. Just be aware of both possibilities." At precisely 4 o'clock, Beth's doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Ethan standing alone on her porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. He looked younger than his 18 years, in jeans and a Boston College sweatshirt, clutching what appeared to be a folded piece of paper. "Grandma Ruth," he said when she opened the door. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you." Beth studied her grandson's face. He looked tired, stressed, and possibly remorseful. Part of her wanted to hug him and fix everything immediately. The other part remembered how enthusiastically he'd liked the message excluding her from the family. "Come in, Ethan, we should talk." He settled nervously on her sofa, still clutching the paper. "I wrote you a letter," he said, offering it to her. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I wanted to explain myself." Beth unfolded the handwritten letter, noting that Ethan had taken care with his penmanship. The words were carefully chosen, clearly thought out. "Dear Grandma Beth," she read silently. I want to apologize for liking that message in the group chat. I know it hurt you, and I'm sorry. I was being a coward going along with what my parents wanted instead of thinking for myself. I've been thinking about all the things you've done for me over the years. The money for my car, sure, but also the other stuff. When I was little, you were the only one who remembered I liked strawberry ice cream better than chocolate. You came to my baseball games even when it was raining. You helped me with my science fair projects when my parents were too busy. I know you loved me. I felt loved. But somewhere along the way, I started taking that for granted. I stopped saying thank you. I stopped appreciating you. Mom and Dad keep saying this is all about money, but I think it's about respect. And I haven't been respectful. I'm sorry for that. I don't expect you to fix my car situation or help with college. I got a job at the campus bookstore and I'm applying for more financial aid. I want to figure things out for myself, but I hope someday you'll forgive me because I miss my grandma, the real one, not the one who just wrote checks. Love, Ethan. Beth folded the letter carefully, surprised by the tears threatening her eyes. This was the first genuine apology she'd received from anyone in her family. Ethan, this is beautiful. Thank you for taking the time to write it. Do you forgive me? He asked, his expression vulnerable. Beth looked at her grandson, this young man who was finally taking responsibility for his choices. I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. He nodded seriously. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm going to do better. They talked for another hour. Ethan told her about his new job, his plans for college, and his growing awareness of how his parents had been manipulating the family dynamics. He was more mature than Beth had given him credit for, just buried under years of entitlement and enabling. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happier now since you stopped helping everyone financially? The question surprised her with its insight. Yes, Ethan, I am happier. I'm discovering who I am when I'm not just solving other people's problems. Good. You deserve to be happy. After Ethan left, Beth called Susan to share the unexpected development. Well, that's promising, Susan said. But still be careful. Teenagers can be genuine one minute and their parents' pawns the next. I don't think he's being manipulated. The letter felt sincere. Then that's one relationship worth salvaging. Speaking of relationships worth having, are we still on for the museum on Saturday? Absolutely. Beth confirmed, realizing she was genuinely looking forward to it. That afternoon, Eleanor Hartwell called to check in. Beth, how are you handling the family pressure? Better than I expected. I had a breakthrough with my grandson today. That's wonderful. What about the others? Beth thought about Michael's desperate visits, Stephanie's angry texts, the constant voicemail messages from various family members. They're still in crisis mode, still thinking this is temporary. What makes you think it isn't temporary? Eleanor asked. The question caught Beth off guard. Was this temporary? Was she planning to eventually resume her role as family ATM? Eleanor, I think I've been waiting for them to prove they've changed, but maybe that's the wrong approach. What would be the right approach? Maybe I need to prove to myself that I've changed, that I'm not the same woman who let herself be taken for granted for years. That evening, Beth did something she'd been avoiding for weeks. She sat down and wrote her own letter, not to her family, but to herself. A promise about the woman she wanted to become. Dear Beth, she wrote, you are not responsible for everyone else's financial security. You are not required to sacrifice your comfort for other people's convenience. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to expect gratitude. You are allowed to be appreciated for who you are, not what you can provide. Your worth is not measured by your willingness to solve problems or write checks. Your value comes from your kindness, your wisdom, your decades of experience, and your capacity for love. You have raised your children. You have been a good wife, mother, and grandmother. You have paid your dues. The rest of your life belongs to you. Don't forget this again. Love yourself. She folded the letter and put it in her jewelry box next to Richard's wedding ring and her mother's brooch, a reminder of who she was becoming. That night, Beth slept peacefully for the first time since Linda's funeral, and in her dreams she was sailing on a beautiful boat with Susan while her phone sat silent on the dock. The next morning would bring new challenges, but she was ready for them. She was finally ready to live her own life. The funeral home smelled like lilies and regret. Beth sat in the back row of folding chairs, watching her sister Linda's family grieve without really seeing her. Funny how invisible you become when people don't need your checkbook. Linda had passed suddenly from a heart attack at 68, 2 weeks after Beth's family fallout. Her memorial service was packed with friends, neighbors, and relatives Beth hadn't seen in years. Michael and Stephanie sat in the front row with Ethan playing the part of bereaved nephew and family. They'd nodded politely when they saw Beth but kept their distance. Perfect. She wasn't in the mood for their drama anyway. Beth Wilson, a woman about Beth's age, approached her face familiar but aged. It's me, Susan Williams. We went to high school together. It took Beth a moment to place her. Then the memories flooded back. Susan Peterson, cheerleader prom queen, the girl who'd married her high school sweetheart and moved to California right after graduation. Susan, my goodness, it's been 40 years. 42, Susan laughed, settling into the empty chair beside Beth. I moved back east last year after my husband passed. I'm living in Plymouth now, about an hour from here. They caught up quietly during the service. Susan had raised 3 children in California, worked as a teacher for 30 years, and recently become a widow. Her children were scattered across the country, busy with their own lives. They're good kids, she said, but they treat me like I'm fragile now, like I might break if they don't manage every detail of my life. Beth understood that feeling completely. The well-intentioned smothering, the subtle infantilization, the assumption that age equaled incompetence. After the service, Susan and Beth found themselves at the same table during the reception. Michael made a brief appearance to pay his respects, but he was clearly uncomfortable with Beth's presence. Your son seems nervous, Susan observed, watching Michael retreat to the opposite side of the room. We're going through a family adjustment period, Beth said diplomatically. Susan raised an eyebrow. That sounds like code for something interesting. Beth found herself telling Susan the whole story. The years of financial support, the graduation party humiliation, the group chat exclusion, and her decision to cut off funding. Susan listened with growing amazement. You've been paying their mortgage for 3 years, she asked. Beth, that's incredible, and not in a good way. I'm starting to realize that. My oldest son tried something similar last year, Susan said. Asked me to co-sign a loan for a boat. When I said no, he accused me of being selfish with his inheritance, as if my money was already his. What did you do? Susan smiled wickedly. I bought myself a boat, a beautiful little sailboat that I keep at the marina. Every weekend I post pictures of myself sailing with my new friends. My son doesn't ask for money anymore. They exchanged phone numbers before leaving, making plans to meet for lunch the following week. As Beth drove home, she realized she felt better than she had in months. Susan understood. She'd faced similar family manipulation and found a way to reclaim her life. Maybe Beth wasn't alone in this, after all. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Ethan stood on Beth's doorstep, looking younger than his 18 years, holding the folded piece of paper she recognized as the letter he'd written her. Grandma Beth, I've been thinking more about everything, and I found out something you should know. Beth ushered him inside, noting the dark circles under his eyes. What is it, sweetheart? Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his hands trembling slightly. I overheard Mom and Dad talking to a lawyer last night. They're trying to get control of your money, Grandma. Despite Patricia's warnings, hearing this confirmation from Ethan sent a chill through Beth. Tell me exactly what you heard. They were on speakerphone in Dad's office. I was walking by and heard them talking about something called conservatorship. The lawyer was telling them they needed evidence that you're making erratic financial decisions. Ethan's voice cracked. Dad said they could use the sudden cancellation of all the payments as proof you're not thinking clearly. Beth reached across the table and squeezed Ethan's hand. Thank you for telling me this. There's more, Ethan said, his expression troubled. They want me to testify that you've been acting strange lately, forgetting things, seeming confused. They want me to lie, Grandma. The betrayal was breathtaking in its scope. They weren't just trying to take her money. They were trying to take her autonomy, her dignity, her very right to make her own decisions. What did you tell them? I said I wouldn't do it. We had a huge fight. Dad said I was choosing you over family. Ethan's face hardened. I told him that's a weird definition of family, trying to steal from your own mother. Beth felt a surge of pride in her grandson's moral courage. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, but it was right. Ethan hesitated. I'm thinking of moving out, getting a place near campus. I can't live with them when they're doing this. Ethan, would you be willing to tell Patricia, My lawyer, what you've told me? Absolutely. I'm done protecting them. What they're doing is wrong. Beth called Patricia immediately after Ethan left, relaying his information. This confirms our suspicions, Patricia said grimly. The good news is we're ahead of them. The financial exploitation complaint has been filed. We have a neuropsychological evaluation scheduled for you tomorrow, and now we have a potential witness to their plans. What happens next? We wait for them to make their move, and when they do, we counter with everything we have. In the meantime, continue documenting all interactions. That weekend, Susan drove up to visit and provide moral support. They sat in Beth's garden, drinking wine and planning her counterattack. You know what I find most amazing about this whole situation? Susan said, refilling their glasses. What's that? They're spending money they don't have on lawyers to try to get money they're not entitled to. It's like watching someone dig their own grave with a gold shovel. She was right. The legal fees alone would cost them thousands. Money they clearly didn't have since they'd been depending on Beth's support. Susan, I have an idea. A terrible, wonderful idea. Monday morning, Beth called Patricia with her proposal. The attorney listened carefully, then began laughing. Mrs. Wilson, that's absolutely diabolical and completely legal. I love it. While Michael and Stephanie prepared their conservatorship case, Beth began quietly gathering something much more powerful documentation of every financial interaction they'd had over the past 5 years. Bank transfers, credit card statements, loan agreements, even casual text messages about money. Margaret's team compiled everything into a comprehensive financial history that painted a clear picture of systematic exploitation. But the coup de grace came when Patricia's investigator discovered something Jennifer probably thought Beth would never find out. She'd been telling her friends and neighbors that Beth was becoming senile and that they were managing her finances for her own protection. She'd been laying the groundwork for this legal assault for months, possibly years. Patricia, how much can we sue them for? Beth asked during their strategy meeting. Well, there's the $312,000 in direct transfers. Then there's interest and penalties, emotional distress, legal fees. And if we can prove fraudulent intent, she calculated rapidly, we could be looking at over $500,000. $500,000, more than they'd ever be able to repay. And if they can't pay, then we start seizing assets, the house, the cars, the business equipment. Everything goes to satisfy the judgment. That afternoon, Beth did something that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She authorized Patricia to file a countersuit, immediately asking for full damages and requesting an emergency hearing to freeze all of Michael and Stephanie's assets pending the outcome. Mrs. Wilson, are you sure you want to go nuclear? Patricia asked. Beth thought about the group chat message about Ethan's car being repossessed while they planned their legal assault about years of thankless financial support, followed by accusations of mental incompetence. Patricia, they fired the first shot. I'm just making sure it's the last shot of the war. The papers were served that evening while Michael and Stephanie were having dinner at their favorite restaurant. According to the process server, Stephanie actually shrieked when she read the countersuit. They called Beth within an hour, both of them shouting through the speakerphone. Mom, this is insane! Michael's voice was pitched high with panic. You're trying to destroy us. No, Michael. I'm trying to protect myself from people who've been systematically exploiting me for years. We never exploited you, Stephanie screamed. We loved you. We included you in our family. You included my bank account in your family. There's a difference. The conversation devolved into threats and accusations, but Beth hung up feeling oddly calm. For the first time in this entire mess, she was playing offense instead of defense. That night, Eleanor called to check on her. Beth, how are you feeling about escalating things legally? Honestly, I feel powerful. For years, I've been reacting to their demands, their crises, their emotional manipulation. Now I'm setting the terms. And if they apologize, if they try to make amends, Beth thought about that carefully. Eleanor, I think we're past apologies. They tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my money. That's not a mistake or a misunderstanding. That's a calculated assault on my dignity and freedom. So what's your end game? My end game is showing them that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people badly and expect them to keep enabling you forever. And what about Ethan? Ethan was the one part of this situation that still caused Beth pain, but even that was getting clearer. Ethan's learning that sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to the people you love. It's a hard lesson, but an important one. The legal battle would take months to resolve, but Beth already felt like she'd won something more important than money. She'd won back her self-respect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was sleeping in her own bed in her own house, making her own decisions about her own life. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The meditation conference was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a gray November morning. Patricia had prepared Beth thoroughly, but walking into that sterile conference room still felt like entering a battlefield. Michael and Stephanie sat on one side of the long table with their attorney, a nervous-looking man who kept shuffling papers. Beth took her seat across from them with Patricia beside her, noting how they avoided eye contact. Stephanie looked terrible. She'd lost weight, and her usually perfect hair was showing gray roots. Michael's suit was wrinkled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping. Good. Maybe they were finally understanding the gravity of their situation. The mediator, a calm woman in her 60s named Sarah Blackwood, opened the session with the standard speech about confidentiality and good faith negotiations. "We're here because both parties have filed serious claims against each other," she began. "Mrs. Wilson, you're claiming financial exploitation. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, you're claiming elder financial abuse. These are serious allegations that could result in significant financial and legal consequences for everyone involved." Stephanie's attorney cleared his throat. "Dr. Blackwood, my clients are here today hoping to resolve this matter amicably. They love Mrs. Wilson and want to rebuild their family relationship." Patricia leaned forward. "Dr. Blackwood, my client has documentation showing that the Anderson family has systematically exploited her financially for over 5 years, culminating in an attempt to have her declared mentally incompetent to maintain control of her assets." The mediator reviewed the financial records for several minutes, her expression growing increasingly grave. "Mrs. Anderson," she said finally, "these documents show substantial financial transfers from Mrs. Wilson to your family. Can you explain the nature of these payments?" Stephanie's composure cracked immediately. "She's our family. She wanted to help us. We never forced her to give us anything." "But you did expect those payments to continue indefinitely," Patricia interjected, "even to the point of filing a lawsuit when they stopped." "We filed that lawsuit because her behavior became erratic," Michael burst out. "She cut off all contact with the family over a simple misunderstanding." Dr. Blackwood consulted her notes. "According to the documentation provided, Mrs. Wilson was excluded from family gatherings via group text message. Is that accurate?" The silence that followed was deafening. Their attorney whispered something urgent to Stephanie, who flushed red. "That was taken out of context," Stephanie said weakly. "The message read, and I quote," Patricia said, reading from her notes, "We've all agreed you're no longer part of the family. Don't come to any gatherings." "How exactly is that taken out of context?" Dr. Blackwood made several notes, then looked up with the expression of someone who'd seen enough family dysfunction to fill several psychology textbooks. "Let's take a break," she announced. "I'd like to speak with each party separately." During their private session, Dr. Blackwood was blunt. "Mrs. Wilson, based on the documentation you've provided, you have an extremely strong case for financial exploitation. The pattern of dependency, the manipulation, the attempt to claim mental incompetence, it's textbook elder abuse. What about their claim that I was being abusive by withdrawing support?" She actually laughed. "Mrs. Wilson, you are under no legal obligation to financially support adult children or their families. Withdrawing voluntary assistance is not abuse, it's boundary setting." When the session resumed, Michael and Stephanie looked even more shaken. Their attorney had clearly explained their legal position, which was somewhere between weak and non-existent. "Mrs. Wilson," their attorney began carefully, "my clients would like to apologize for any misunderstandings and propose a settlement." "I'm listening," Beth said coolly. Stephanie leaned forward, tears starting to flow. "Beth, I'm sorry. We're sorry. We took you for granted, and we handled the whole situation badly. We want to make things right." "What did you have in mind?" Michael pulled out a handwritten document. "We've prepared a formal apology acknowledging our mistakes. We'll drop our lawsuit immediately, and we'll agree to a structured repayment plan for the money you've given us over the years." Patricia examined the document, her eyebrows rising. "Mrs. Wilson, they're proposing to repay $50,000 over 10 years. That's less than 20% of what you've actually provided, and it doesn't include interest or legal fees." "Michael, do you have any idea how much money I've given your family over the past 5 years?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I know it's been substantial. $312,000 plus interest. That's over $350,000 in today's dollars. The number hit the room like a bomb. Stephanie actually gasped. Their attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. You're offering to repay $50,000 of the $350,000 as you've taken from me, and you think that's fair. Mom, we don't have that kind of money, Michael said desperately. We've been living paycheck to paycheck. Living paycheck to paycheck on my paycheck, Beth corrected. Michael, you've been charging casino trips and golf memberships to my credit cards while telling people I help out sometimes. That's not paycheck to paycheck living. That's fraud. Stephanie tried a different approach. Beth, what about Ethan? He's your grandson. Do you really want to destroy his family over money? The manipulation was so blatant it was almost impressive. Appeal to Beth's love for Ethan to guilt her into accepting their inadequate offer. Stephanie, let me be very clear about something. Ethan will always be welcome in my life, regardless of what happens between us. But he's also learning an important lesson about consequences and integrity, something you apparently never taught him. Dr. Blackwood intervened. Let's focus on realistic solutions. Mrs. Wilson, what would you need to see to consider settling this matter? Beth looked across the table at Michael and Stephanie, these people who'd been so casual about taking her money and so vicious about attacking her competence when she stopped providing it. Full repayment of all documented transfers, plus legal fees and interest, a formal admission of financial exploitation, and a binding agreement that they will never again contact me asking for financial assistance. Their attorney went pale. Mrs. Wilson, that's over $500,000. My clients don't have those resources. Then perhaps they should have thought about that before filing a frivolous lawsuit claiming I'm mentally incompetent. Stephanie dissolved into tears. Beth, you're asking us to lose everything. Our house, our cars, Michael's business. You risked everything when you decided to bite the hand that fed you, Beth replied calmly. I'm simply allowing you to face the natural consequences of your choices. The mediation continued for another 2 hours, but the positions were clear. They wanted Beth to accept pennies on the dollar and pretend the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. She wanted full accountability and actual consequences. As they were packing up to leave, Michael made one last desperate plea. Mom, please, I know we screwed up, but we're still family. Don't destroy us over this. Beth looked at her son, really looked at him, and felt a strange mixture of love and disappointment. Michael, you destroyed this relationship when you decided I wasn't family unless I was paying your bills. I'm just declining to keep funding my own mistreatment. Patricia was practically glowing. Mrs. Wilson, that was magnificent. They have no legal ground to stand on and they know it. What happens next? They have 30 days to respond to our settlement demand. If they refuse, we go to trial and likely get everything we asked for plus punitive damages. That evening, Ethan called. Grandma, I heard about the mediation. Are you okay? I'm better than okay, sweetheart. I'm finally free. What does that mean? It means I'm done letting other people define my worth based on what I can do for them. It means I'm going to spend the rest of my life being appreciated for who I am, not what I can provide. And our relationship. Ethan, you and I are fine. You apologize sincerely. You're taking responsibility for your choices, and you're building your own life. That's all I ever wanted from any of you. After they hung up, Beth poured herself a glass of wine and sat in her garden watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Tomorrow might bring more legal challenges, more family drama, more attempts at manipulation. But tonight she was exactly where she wanted to be, free, independent, and finally in control of her own story. The envelope was hand-delivered on a Thursday afternoon, dropped off by a nervous-looking courier who disappeared before Beth could ask who had sent it. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery bearing the letterhead of Anderson Contracting LLC, Michael's business. The letter was typed formal and devastating. Dear Mom, we've made our decision. We're not accepting your settlement terms and we're not dropping our lawsuit. Our attorney has advised us that we have a strong case for elder financial abuse, and we're prepared to take this matter to trial. Furthermore, we've hired a forensic accountant to examine all financial transactions between us over the past 5 years. We believe we'll be able to prove that you used money as a weapon to control our family's decisions. We're also pursuing a competency evaluation. Your recent erratic behavior and vindictive legal actions suggest cognitive decline that requires professional assessment. This ends now. Either you restore our financial arrangements and drop your frivolous countersuit, or we'll see you in court. Michael and Stephanie Anderson. Beth read the letter twice, then set it down and started laughing. Not bitter laughter or angry laughter, but genuine amusement at the sheer audacity of it all. They were doubling down after everything that had been discovered. After all the evidence Patricia had compiled, they were actually trying to intimidate her into submission. She called Patricia immediately. "They want a war," Patricia said after Beth read her the letter. "Perfect. I love it when opposing counsel makes my job easier." "How is this making your job easier?" "Because they just put their threats in writing. Attempting to coerce an elderly person through legal intimidation is a felony in this state. We can now add criminal charges to our civil suit." Criminal charges. That afternoon, Patricia filed additional motions with the court, including a request for criminal investigation of the Anderson family's actions. She also expedited their asset freezing request, effectively locking down everything they owned pending the trial outcome. The phone started ringing at 6:00 p.m., Michael hysterical and barely coherent. "Mom, what have you done? The bank just froze our accounts. We can't pay the mortgage. We can't pay our employees. We can't pay anything. Michael, you sent me a letter threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent. What did you think would happen? This is insane. You're destroying innocent people over hurt feelings." "Innocent people?" Beth almost choked on the irony. "Michael, you've spent 5 years systematically exploiting me financially, then tried to have me declared mentally incompetent when I stopped enabling you. In what world does that make you innocent? Then perhaps you should have considered that before escalating this situation. We can't take back what we wrote. Please, we'll accept your settlement terms. We'll agree to anything." It was too late for that, and they both knew it. They'd crossed a line by threatening her mental competency, and there was no walking that back. "Stephanie, you had multiple opportunities to resolve this reasonably. You chose aggression instead. Now you'll live with the consequences." Beth hung up and immediately called Eleanor. "Beth, how are you handling the escalation?" "Honestly, I feel powerful. For the first time in this whole mess, I'm not reacting to their moves. I'm making the moves." "Are you concerned about the family relationships?" Beth thought about that carefully. "Eleanor, what relationship? For 5 years, they've seen me as a resource to be managed. When I stopped being useful, they tried to have me declared incompetent. That's not a relationship worth preserving." "What about Ethan?" Ethan remained the one bright spot in this disaster. He'd called earlier to tell her he'd been subpoenaed to testify and was actually looking forward to it. "Grandma, I want to tell the truth about what they did, about how they talked about you, how they planned this whole thing. People need to know." The trial was scheduled for February, but the criminal investigation moved faster. Detective Maria Santos from the Elder Abuse Unit called on Friday morning. "Mrs. Wilson, I've reviewed your complaint and the supporting documentation. We're opening a formal investigation into financial exploitation and attempted fraud." "What does that mean?" "It means Mr. and Mrs. Anderson could be facing felony charges. Financial exploitation of an elderly person carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison." 10 years. The number hit Beth like a physical blow. She'd wanted accountability consequences justice, but the thought of her son in prison for a decade was almost unbearable. "Detective Santos, what if they were to plead guilty and agree to full restitution?" "That would be up to the district attorney's office, but it's certainly possible, especially for first-time offenders." That evening, Susan drove up for a planned visit, arriving to find Beth sitting in her garden, staring at the sunset. "Beth, you look troubled. What's happening?" Beth told her about the criminal investigation, the potential prison sentences, her conflicted feelings about how far this had escalated. "Are you having second thoughts?" Susan asked gently. "I don't know. Part of me wants them to face real consequences for what they did, but part of me never wanted it to go this far." Susan was quiet for a long moment, then asked a question that cut straight to the heart of everything. "Beth, if you could go back 5 years and know everything you know now, would you still have helped them financially?" Beth considered it carefully. "No, I would have set boundaries from the beginning. And if you had set those boundaries, if they had treated you with dignity while accepting your help, then we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation." Susan nodded. "That's your answer. This isn't about the money, and it never was. It's about dignity and respect. They chose to treat you badly, and now they're learning that actions have consequences." She was right. Beth wasn't destroying her family over money. She was protecting herself from people who'd been systematically destroying her sense of self-worth for years. Monday morning brought an unexpected call from a reporter at the Boston Globe. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm working on a story about elder financial abuse in our community. Would you be willing to share your experience?" The idea terrified and thrilled Beth simultaneously. Going public would mean exposing her family's behavior to the entire community, but it would also mean helping other elderly people recognize and resist similar exploitation. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. The story would be published with or without your participation, but your perspective would be valuable." After she hung up, Beth called Patricia. "Should I talk to the reporter?" "Mrs. Wilson, that's entirely your decision. But I will say this publicity often encourages other victims to come forward." Other victims. You might not be the only elderly person they've taken advantage of. The thought hadn't occurred to Beth, but it made perfect sense. People who would systematically exploit their own mother might not limit themselves to family members. She called the reporter back that afternoon. "I'll do the interview, but I want to make sure the focus is on prevention and education, not just sensationalizing my family's dysfunction." "Absolutely, Mrs. Wilson. This is about helping other families avoid similar situations." As Beth prepared for the interview, she realized something important. She wasn't ashamed anymore. For months, she'd felt embarrassed about being taken advantage of, guilty about cutting off support, conflicted about the legal consequences. But now she felt something else entirely proud. Proud of finally standing up for herself. Proud of refusing to be anyone's ATM. Proud of showing other elderly people that they didn't have to tolerate financial abuse from their families. Tomorrow would bring the interview, and next week would bring more legal developments. But tonight she was sleeping peacefully, knowing she'd chosen dignity over dysfunction. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The response was overwhelming and unexpected. "Mrs. Wilson," said the first caller, an elderly woman named Grace Patterson. "I read your story in the paper and I wanted to thank you. My daughter has been pressuring me to co-sign loans for years, and reading about your experience gave me the courage to say no." The second call came from a man whose son had been gradually taking control of his finances for his own protection. The third was from a woman whose family was pressuring her to sell her house and move in with them. By the end of the week, Beth had received over 40 calls from elderly people dealing with financial manipulation from their families. The article had touched a nerve in the community. Eleanor suggested Beth consider starting a support group. "You've obviously struck a chord. These people need guidance, and you have experience they can learn from." "I don't know anything about running support groups." "You know about setting boundaries, recognizing manipulation, and standing up for yourself. That's exactly what they need to hear." The idea grew on Beth over the weekend. Susan encouraged it enthusiastically. "You could call it something like Seniors Supporting Seniors or the Dignity Project," she suggested. "Meet weekly, share experiences, give each other courage." "Would you help me run it?" "Are you kidding? I've been dealing with my own family manipulation for years. This sounds perfect." They scheduled the first meeting for the following Thursday evening at the Newton Senior Center. Beth expected maybe a dozen people. 27 showed up. The stories they shared were heartbreaking and familiar. Adult children who'd gradually taken control of bank accounts. Grandchildren who only called when they needed money. Families who'd isolated elderly relatives from friends and outside support. But the most powerful moment came when a frail woman in her 80s stood up to speak. "My name is Dorothy, and 6 months ago my son convinced me to sign over power of attorney because I was getting confused. Last week I discovered he'd sold my house and moved me into assisted living without my consent. I don't know what to do." The room went silent. Dorothy's situation was exactly what Michael and Stephanie had been trying to create for Beth. "Dorothy," Beth said gently, "have you spoken to an attorney? I can't afford one, and my son says no one will believe me because I'm old and forgetful." Patricia had been attending the meeting as Beth's guest. She stepped forward. "Dorothy, I'm a family law attorney, and what you're describing is criminal fraud. I'd be happy to represent you pro bono." By the end of the evening, Patricia had taken on 3 more cases, and they'd formed a network of support that felt revolutionary. These weren't just support group members. They were warriors reclaiming their dignity. Meanwhile, Beth's own legal case was approaching its climax. Michael and Stephanie's attorney had requested another mediation session, claiming his clients were now willing to accept full accountability. "Mrs. Wilson," he said during their phone call, "my clients realized they made serious errors in judgment. They're prepared to accept your original settlement terms and provide a public apology. What about the criminal investigation? They're hoping that full restitution might convince the district attorney to consider reduced charges. Beth discussed it with Patricia, who was skeptical. They're desperate. Mrs. Wilson, the criminal investigation has uncovered some additional financial irregularities. Apparently, they've been running similar schemes on other elderly family members. Other family members. Stephanie's grandmother on her father's side, Michael's great-aunt. They've been systematically exploiting elderly relatives for years. You were just the biggest score. The revelation was sickening. This wasn't a family disagreement that got out of hand. It was a pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable elderly people. Patricia, what kind of additional charges are we looking at? Multiple counts of elder financial abuse, elder fraud, conspiracy. If convicted on all counts, they could be facing 20 to 30 years combined. 20 to 30 years. The numbers felt surreal. Her son and daughter-in-law could spend decades in prison for what had started as unpaid mortgage assistance. But the more Beth learned about their other victims, the less sympathy she felt. Stephanie's grandmother had lost her life savings. Michael's great-aunt had been forced to sell her home. They'd been running a family financial abuse operation for at least 6 years. The second mediation session was scheduled for the following week. This time, Michael and Stephanie arrived looking defeated, accompanied by a different attorney and a financial advisor. Mrs. Wilson, their new attorney, began, "My clients want to make a full confession and complete restitution to all victims." They'd prepared a comprehensive settlement package, full repayment of all money taken from Beth, $327,000, with interest, similar restitution to the other elderly relatives, public apologies acknowledging their financial abuse, and agreements to seek counseling for financial manipulation behaviors. "What about the criminal charges?" Patricia asked. "The district attorney has agreed to consider plea bargains if full restitution is made to all victims, and my clients cooperate with the investigation." Beth looked across the table at Michael and Stephanie. Jennifer was crying silently, her makeup streaked down her cheeks. Michael looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 6 months. "Michael," Beth said quietly, "do you understand what you did not just to me, but to all of us?" He nodded, unable to speak. "Say it. I need to hear you say it." His voice was barely a whisper. "We exploited you. We took advantage of your generosity and your love for family. We manipulated you financially and emotionally. And when you tried to protect yourself, we attacked your mental competency to try to regain control. And we did the same thing to other family members. We targeted elderly relatives because we thought they were vulnerable and couldn't fight back." Stephanie looked up, mascara streaking her face. "Beth, I'm so sorry. We became people I don't recognize. We hurt people we should have protected." It was the first genuine apology Beth had received from either of them. Dr. Blackwood, who was mediating again, reviewed the settlement terms carefully. "Mrs. Wilson, this is a comprehensive resolution. Are you prepared to accept these terms?" Beth thought about Dorothy from the support group, about the other elderly people who'd called after the newspaper article about the pattern of abuse that went far beyond her own family. "I'll accept the financial terms and the cooperation with criminal investigation, but I have additional requirements." "What kind of requirements?" Michael looked up for the first time during the session. "Mom, you want us to help other families. I want you to help repair the damage you've done to the community. Financial abuse destroys families, Michael. Maybe you can help put some of them back together." The agreement was signed that afternoon: full restitution to all victims, cooperation with law enforcement, and a commitment to elder abuse prevention advocacy. Walking out of that conference room, Beth felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Not hope for rebuilding her relationship with Michael and Stephanie, but hope that something good might come from this nightmare. That evening, Ethan called with news that surprised her. "Grandma, I've been accepted to law school. I want to specialize in elder law, helping elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse." "Ethan, that's wonderful. What inspired the career change?" "You did. Watching you fight back showed me that someone needs to stand up for people who are being taken advantage of. I want to be that someone." As she hung up the phone, Beth realized that the most important victory wasn't the money she'd recovered or the justice she'd achieved. It was the example she'd set for her grandson and the dozens of other elderly people who were now finding their voices. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was proud of who she'd become. Not the grandmother who wrote checks to buy affection, but the woman who stood up for herself and inspired others to do the same. He opened the folder, revealing what looked like court documents and newspaper clippings. Remember how Dad and Mom said they'd only been doing this for a few years? Well, I dug deeper into public records. Grandma, they've been running this scam for over a decade. Beth's blood went cold. What do you mean? Ethan spread out the documents methodically. Stephanie's first husband before she married Dad. She convinced his elderly father to sign over power of attorney in 2009. The old man died 6 months later, and Stephanie inherited everything. The family contested the will, but by then the money was gone. Beth stared at the documents, trying to process what she was seeing. Ethan, are you saying Stephanie has done this before? Not just Stephanie, Dad too. Remember his first business? The one that failed right before he married Stephanie? I found bankruptcy records. He'd been charging elderly clients for home repairs, taking their money up front, then declaring bankruptcy to avoid completing the work. The room started spinning. This wasn't a family that had gradually fallen into bad financial habits. This was a systematic pattern of elder abuse going back more than a decade. How many victims? Ethan's face was grim. At least 12 that I can document. Probably more. Grandma, they've been targeting elderly people their entire adult lives. Beth reached for her phone to call Patricia, but Ethan stopped her. There's more. Something that's going to hurt. He pulled out a final document, this one newer than the others. Last week, Stephanie filed for divorce from Dad. But here's the thing. She's claiming that the elder abuse was all his idea, that she was just following his lead. She's trying to cut a deal with the district attorney to testify against him in exchange for reduced charges. The betrayal was stunning. After everything they'd done together, Stephanie was now throwing Michael under the bus to save herself. Where is your father now? He's moved back in with Uncle James temporarily. He's been calling me wanting to meet and explain everything. I think he's finally ready to tell the whole truth. Beth agreed to meet Michael that evening at a neutral location, a quiet diner on the edge of town where they could talk privately. He was waiting when she arrived, looking haggard and defeated. Mom, thank you for coming. I know you don't owe me anything. Beth slid into the booth across from him, noting how much weight he'd lost, how gray his hair had become. Ethan told me about Stephanie's plea bargain, and about the other victims. Michael's shoulders sagged. So you know. I know some of it. I want to hear the rest from you. For the next 2 hours, Michael told Beth a story that was even worse than she'd imagined. Stephanie had been running elder abuse scams since her early 20s, targeting wealthy elderly people through dating sites, church groups, and community organizations. She'd refined her techniques over the years, becoming expert at identifying vulnerable targets and gaining their trust. She taught me everything, Michael said, his voice hollow. How to spot elderly people who were isolated, how to gradually gain control of their finances, how to make them dependent on us emotionally so they'd keep giving. Michael, you're talking about predatory behavior. You were deliberately targeting vulnerable people. I know that now, but at the time, Stephanie made it seem like we were just accepting generosity from people who wanted to help family. She had a way of justifying everything. What about me? Was I just another target? Michael looked up and Beth saw tears in his eyes. You were different. You're my mother. I love you. But Stephanie convinced me that you wanted to help, that taking your money was just letting you feel useful and needed. For 5 years, Michael, you let me pay your bills while treating me like hired help. I know, and I hate myself for it. His voice broke. Mom, I want to make this right. How? Michael pulled out his own folder of documents. I've been working with a private investigator documenting all of Stephanie's previous victims. I want to help them get their money back. I want to testify against her in court. I want to make sure she never does this to another family. The conversation continued until almost midnight. Michael told Beth about elderly victims who'd lost life savings, about families torn apart by Stephanie's manipulations, about a pattern of abuse that spanned multiple states and countless victims. Why are you telling me all this now? Beth asked finally. Because Ethan made me realize something. He said you didn't fight back just for the money. You fought back to protect other people from going through what you went through. And he's right. If I don't help stop Stephanie, she'll just find new victims. A week later, Beth sat in the district attorney's office with Patricia, Ethan, and Michael as prosecutors outlined their expanded case against Stephanie. With Michael's cooperation, they'd identified 17 additional victims and recovered evidence of a sophisticated elder abuse operation. Mrs. Wilson, the lead prosecutor, said your decision to fight back has potentially saved dozens of future victims. Jennifer Wright, that's her real name by the way, has been running these scams across multiple states for over 15 years. Wright wasn't even her real last name. She'd been using false identities, fake references, and forged documents to gain credibility with her targets. The support group meeting that Thursday was larger than usual. Word had spread about the criminal investigation, and several people had driven from neighboring counties to attend. Dorothy, whose son had stolen her house, stood up to share an update. I wanted everyone to know that thanks to Patricia and this group, I got my house back. My son has been arrested, and I'm living independently again. The applause was thunderous. Dorothy had become a symbol of what was possible when elderly people refused to be victims. But more importantly, she continued, I've learned that age doesn't make us powerless. It makes us experienced, and experience is the best weapon we have against people who try to take advantage of us. After the meeting, Ethan pulled Beth aside. Grandma, I've been thinking about something. This support group, the legal work you're doing, the advocacy, it's become bigger than just our family situation. What do you mean? I mean you've started a movement. People are calling you the Dignity Grandmother online. There are support groups starting in other cities modeling themselves after ours. You've become a symbol. A symbol. The idea was both flattering and terrifying. Ethan, I just wanted people to stop taking advantage of me. And in the process, you've shown thousands of other elderly people that they don't have to tolerate abuse either. That's bigger than just our family grandma. That's changing the world. As Beth drove home that night, she thought about the strange turns her life had taken. A year ago, she'd been a lonely widow writing checks to buy family affection. Now she was leading a movement helping elderly people across the country find their voices and reclaim their dignity. The road ahead still held challenges. Stephanie's trial was scheduled for the next month, and there would likely be more victims coming forward. Michael was facing his own legal consequences, though his cooperation had earned him a more favorable plea agreement. But for the first time in years, Beth felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not as someone's ATM or enabler, but as an advocate for people who'd been forgotten and dismissed. Ms. Wright, the judge began using Stephanie's real name. You have been convicted of multiple counts of elder financial abuse, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The evidence shows a pattern of predatory behavior spanning over 15 years and affecting dozens of elderly victims across multiple states. Beth watched Stephanie's face remain expressionless as the judge continued. The court has received victim impact statements from 23 elderly people whose lives you've destroyed. You've stolen life savings, destroyed family relationships, and left vulnerable people homeless and destitute. The judge paused, consulting her notes. However, the court has also received several letters on your behalf, including one from Mrs. Elizabeth Wilson, whose family you targeted most recently. Beth had agonized over that letter for weeks. Patricia had advised against it. Ethan had questioned her motives, but Eleanor had helped her understand why she needed to write it. Your Honor, she'd written, I do not ask for leniency for Stephanie Wright. She is a predator who targeted vulnerable elderly people with calculated cruelty. However, I want the court to know that her victims are not just broken elderly people. We are strong, resilient individuals who have survived and thrived despite her abuse. We have found our voices, reclaimed our dignity, and built a community of support that will outlast any prison sentence you impose. Stephanie Wright stole our money, but she could not steal our spirit. Judge Steinberg continued reading from Beth's letter. Mrs. Wilson writes that while she supports the maximum sentence, she wants the court to understand that the victims in this case have become advocates and leaders helping other elderly people recognize and resist financial abuse. The judge set down the letter and looked directly at Stephanie. Wright, based on the severity of your crimes, the pattern of predatory behavior, and the extensive harm you've caused to vulnerable victims, this court sentences you to 55 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. 55 years. Stephanie would die in prison. There was no visible reaction from her, but Beth felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but resolution. The woman who'd tried to steal her dignity and destroy her family's future would never hurt another elderly person. After the hearing, the victims gathered outside the courthouse for what had become an impromptu support meeting. Dorothy was there along with Grace Patterson and several others from their Thursday group. What happens now? Asked Eleanor Murphy, a woman whose daughter-in-law had stolen her jewelry collection. Now we keep fighting, Beth said. This was never just about Stephanie or my family. This was about showing elderly people everywhere that they don't have to tolerate abuse. Ethan approached with a newspaper reporter who'd been covering the case. "Mrs. Wilson, how do you feel about the sentence?" "I feel like justice has been served, but more importantly, I feel proud of what all the victims accomplished by speaking up. We showed that elderly people are not helpless targets. We're experienced, intelligent individuals who refuse to be silenced." That afternoon, Beth received a call that surprised her. Michael was being released from county jail after serving 8 months and completing his community service requirements. His cooperation had earned him a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation. "Mom," he said when she answered the phone, "I know I don't have the right to ask, but would you consider meeting with me? I want to apologize properly and I have something to propose." They met at the same diner where he'd confessed Stephanie's full history of abuse. He looked better than he had in months, healthier, more focused, less defeated. "Mom, I know I can never fully make up for what I did to you and the others, but I want to try." "What did you have in mind?" Michael pulled out a business plan professionally prepared and detailed. "I want to start a nonprofit organization focused on elder abuse prevention. I want to use my experience as Stephanie's partner to help law enforcement identify and prosecute financial predators." Beth reviewed the documents carefully. The plan was comprehensive, well-researched, and potentially very effective. "And you'd work with our support group, if you'll have me. Mom, I know I'll never be your son the way I was before all this happened, but maybe I can be something better. Maybe I can be part of the solution instead of part of the problem." It took Beth several weeks to decide. She consulted with Ethan, with Eleanor, with Patricia, and with the other support group members. The consensus was cautious, but supportive. "If he's serious about prevention work," Dorothy said, "then his insider knowledge could help a lot of people." 6 months later, Michael's nonprofit, the Dignity Defense Foundation, had helped identify 3 new elder abuse operations and assisted law enforcement in recovering over $400,000 for elderly victims. Their Thursday support group had grown into a network of 17 chapters across 3 states. Ethan had graduated law school and opened a practice specializing in elder law. The newspaper had written a follow-up article calling their movement a model for elder advocacy nationwide. But the moment that meant the most to Beth came on a quiet Tuesday evening. Ethan called with news that his law firm had just taken on a major case, a class-action lawsuit against a scam operation targeting elderly people through fake charity calls. "Grandma, we're going to shut down an entire call center that's been stealing from seniors. And it all started because you taught me that elderly people deserve dignity and respect." After they hung up, Beth sat in her garden watching the sunset and thinking about the strange journey her life had taken. A year and a half ago, she'd been a lonely widow writing checks to buy family affection. Now she was leading a movement that was helping elderly people across the country find their voices. Her phone buzzed with a text from Susan. "Wine tonight? I have news about my sailboat adventure." Beth smiled and texted back, "Absolutely. I have news too." As she got ready for their evening together, Beth caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same person who'd stood in her kitchen 18 months ago, humiliated and excluded from her family's life. This woman stood straighter, smiled more confidently, lived more fully. This woman had learned that dignity wasn't something other people could give or take away. It was something you claimed for yourself, defended fiercely, and shared generously with others who needed to find their own. And this woman was just getting started. What began as one woman's refusal to continue funding her own mistreatment has evolved into a nationwide movement, the reporter wrote. Elizabeth Wilson never intended to become the face of elder financial abuse prevention, but her courage in speaking out has empowered thousands of other victims to reclaim their dignity and financial independence. The article included statistics on elder financial abuse, an estimated $36 billion stolen from seniors each year, with family members being the perpetrators in over 60% of cases. It also shared abbreviated stories from several support group members, including Dorothy, whose successful recovery of her home had become a rallying point for the movement. Beth's phone began ringing before she'd even finished her morning coffee. The first call was from a producer at NPR asking for an interview. The second was from a state senator interested in sponsoring legislation based on the Wilson Protocol, the set of financial protection guidelines Beth had developed with Patricia for elderly individuals. By noon, her voicemail was full, and her email inbox was overflowing with messages from elderly victims, family members concerned about exploitation, and advocates from across the country wanting to start local chapters of the Dignity movement. "Your expertise isn't in law, Mrs. Wilson," the managing partner explained. but in recognizing the human dynamics of elder exploitation. That's something law school doesn't teach. In the months that followed, Beth found herself speaking at conferences, testifying before legislative committees, and training bank employees to recognize signs of financial exploitation. The Dignity Defense Foundation, now run by Michael, with Beth serving as a board member, had expanded to 5 states and was partnering with law enforcement agencies to identify and prosecute predatory schemes targeting the elderly. Ethan's elder law practice was thriving with a focus on preventative legal protections rather than after-the-fact litigation. He'd developed a simplified power of attorney document with built-in safeguards that was being adopted as a model across the state. "We're making a difference," he told Beth over dinner one evening. "The district attorney's office says reported cases of elder financial abuse are up 40% since we started. Not because there's more abuse, but because more victims are coming forward." "That's the whole point," Beth replied. "We can't stop every predator, but we can make sure they don't get away with it." The most surprising development came on a rainy Tuesday in April, nearly 2 years after the initial group chat message that had started it all. Beth was reviewing materials for a new training program when she received an unexpected email from James Michael's brother. "Beth," it read, "I owe you an apology. I liked that message excluding you from the family without understanding what was really happening. I was following Michael's lead without questioning it, which is something I've done my whole life. Watching you stand up for yourself made me realize how often I've gone along with things I knew were wrong, just to keep the peace. I'd like to talk if you're willing." Beth hadn't spoken to James or his wife Hannah since the group chat incident. They'd kept their distance during the legal proceedings, neither supporting Michael nor reaching out to Beth. She replied with an invitation to coffee the following week. When they met at a quiet cafe in Winchester, James looked older than she remembered, more serious. "I've been following your work," he said after they'd ordered. "The dignity movement. It's making waves even in my industry." James worked in financial services, Beth recalled. "What kind of waves?" "The good kind. We've implemented new training for all our advisors on recognizing potential exploitation. Your materials are part of the curriculum." He hesitated. "Beth, I should have stood up for you. I knew Michael and Stephanie were taking advantage of your generosity, but I didn't want to rock the boat." "Why not?" "Honestly, I was afraid of being excluded, too. Michael has always been the dominant one in our relationship. He decides I follow. It's been that way since we were kids." Beth considered this. She'd always seen James as the more stable of her sons, the one who didn't need her financial support. But perhaps he'd had his own struggles that she'd never recognized. "James, we all have patterns we need to break. It's never too late to start." "That's what I'm trying to do now," he admitted. "Hannah and I have been in counseling. We're learning to set better boundaries to stop enabling bad behavior in the name of family peace." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, touching on family history, shared responsibility, and the possibility of rebuilding some form of relationship. By the time they parted, Beth felt another piece of her past shifting into perspective. That evening, she called Eleanor to discuss the unexpected reconciliation. "It's not surprising," Eleanor said. "When one person in a family system changes their behavior, it forces everyone else to adjust. You stopped playing your assigned role, and it's creating ripples throughout the family." "I never expected James to apologize." "The most powerful thing you did, Beth, wasn't standing up to Michael and Stephanie. It was showing the entire family a different way to be. You demonstrated that it's possible to break patterns, to value yourself, to refuse exploitation in the name of family loyalty." "I just wanted my money back," Beth laughed. "No," Eleanor countered gently. "You wanted your dignity back. The money was just the tangible representation." As Beth's public profile grew, so did the scope of her advocacy. What had begun as a small support group in Newton had expanded into a national network with local chapters in 38 states. The Dignity Movement had helped recover over $12 million for elderly victims and had successfully lobbied for enhanced penalties for elder financial abuse in 7 states. Ethan had expanded his legal practice to include 3 other attorneys, all specializing in different aspects of elder protection. They offered reduced fee services for victims and had developed a standardized financial dignity plan that was being adopted by retirement communities across New England. And Beth, she'd found purpose in places she'd never expected. Her calendar was filled with speaking engagements, advocacy meetings, and mentoring sessions with new support group leaders. At 70, she had more energy, more passion, and more fulfillment than she'd experienced in decades. But the true measure of her transformation came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, as she sat in her garden, now flourishing with plants she'd carefully selected and tended herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Susan. "Boat's ready for summer. First sailing trip next weekend, bring wine." Beth smiled and texted back, "Wouldn't miss it." After setting down her phone, she returned to the notebook in her lap. She'd been working on a memoir, The Price of Family, documenting her journey from exploitation to empowerment. The publisher had been enthusiastic, seeing it not just as a personal story, but as a guidebook for other elderly individuals navigating complex family financial dynamics. As she wrote the final chapter, Beth reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. She had lost the family she thought she had, but gained a purpose she never expected. She had experienced betrayal from those closest to her, but found authentic connection with kindred spirits like Susan Dorothy and the other members of the movement. Most importantly, she had discovered that her value had never been in what she could provide, but in who she was. A woman of strength, resilience, and dignity who refused to be diminished by others' expectations. The sun was setting over her garden, casting long shadows across the flowers she'd planted. Beth closed her notebook, satisfied with the day's writing. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more advocacy work, more opportunities to help others find their voices. But tonight she would simply enjoy the beauty of her garden, the comfort of her home, and the peace that comes from living life on her own terms. The applause was thunderous as Beth stepped to the microphone. Looking out at the gathered crowd, she saw faces that had become dear to her over the past 3 years. Susan in the front row, beaming with pride. Dorothy, now a fierce advocate in her own right. Patricia and her team of attorneys who'd taken on dozens of elder abuse cases pro bono. Eleanor, who'd helped Beth navigate the emotional landscape of her transformation. Ethan, who'd grown from an entitled teenager into a passionate defender of elderly rights. And in the back of the room, standing quietly but attentively, Michael. Their relationship had been rebuilt on different terms, not as mother and son in the traditional sense, but as allies in a cause bigger than both of them. His nonprofit had become an essential part of the movement, his first-hand knowledge of exploitation tactics proving invaluable in education and prevention efforts. 3 years ago, Beth began, I was a widow writing checks to buy family affection. I thought my value was in what I could provide, not who I was. I thought saying no meant losing love. I was wrong. She paused, looking down at her notes, then set them aside. This wasn't a moment for prepared remarks. What I've learned, what we've all learned together, is that dignity isn't negotiable. It isn't something other people can take from you unless you let them. And when you stand up for your own dignity, you make it possible for others to do the same. Beth gestured to the gathered advocates and survivors. Look around this room. Every person here has a story. Every person here has faced manipulation, exploitation, or the assumption that age equals vulnerability. And every person here has found the courage to say enough. The room was silent attendees hanging on her every word. This law is important. It will help protect elderly individuals from financial predators, including, perhaps especially, those who claim to love them. But laws alone can't create the change we need. That happens when we change how we think about ourselves, when we refuse to be defined by others' expectations, when we recognize that our worth isn't measured by what we give, but by who we are. Michael nodded slightly, acknowledging both the rebuke and the recognition of his efforts. The dignity movement isn't just about preventing financial abuse, Beth concluded. It's about reclaiming our voices, our autonomy, and our right to be respected at any age. That's the legacy I hope we're building together, a world where aging brings wisdom and respect, not vulnerability and exploitation. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. After the ceremony, Beth found herself surrounded by well-wishers, reporters, and advocates eager to discuss next steps. But her attention was drawn to a quiet corner where Ethan stood deep in conversation with a young woman Beth didn't recognize. When they approached, Ethan's face was alight with excitement. Grandma, I want you to meet Professor Daniela Martinez from Boston College Law School. She's interested in establishing an elder justice clinic where law students can help represent financial abuse victims. Mrs. Wilson, Daniela said, extending her hand. Your work has been revolutionary in changing how we think about elder exploitation. I'd like to incorporate the dignity movement's approaches into our clinical program. That sounds wonderful, Beth replied. And please call me Beth. As they discussed possibilities for collaboration, Beth felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Susan dressed elegantly in a navy suit that matched Beth's own. "Don't forget we have dinner reservations at 7, Susan reminded her. "The whole sailing club is waiting to celebrate." Beth smiled. The weekend sailing excursions that had begun as Susan's solitary act of rebellion had evolved into a regular social event for a group of women in their 60s and 70s who called themselves the Sea Dignities. Their adventures on Massachusetts Bay had become a cherished counterpoint to Beth's advocacy work, a space where she could simply enjoy life without responsibility or purpose beyond the pleasure of the moment. "I'll be there," Beth promised. "Just let me wrap up a few things here." As the crowd thinned, Michael approached cautiously. "That was quite a speech, Mom." "Thank you. I meant what I said about making amends through action." He nodded. "The Foundation's new prevention program launches next month. We've already got 40 schools signed up for the curriculum. I saw the materials. They're excellent." An awkward silence fell between them. Their working relationship had become comfortable, professional even, but the personal connection remained tentative, limited by the weight of past betrayals. "James called yesterday," Michael said finally. "He's thinking about joining the Foundation's board. Said he wants to be part of something worthwhile. That would be good for him. For both of you." "Yeah," Michael hesitated. "Mom, I know things will never be the same between us. I don't expect them to be. But I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. What we've all built together from the ashes of my mistakes." Beth studied her son's face, noting the genuine emotion in his eyes. "It's not what I expected my retirement to look like," she admitted with a small smile. "But then the best journeys rarely take us where we thought we were going." That evening, surrounded by her sailing friends at their favorite waterfront restaurant, Beth found herself the reluctant center of attention as Susan raised a toast. "To Beth," Susan proclaimed, lifting her glass, "who taught us all that it's never too late to reclaim your life, your dignity, and your right to sail your own damn boat." Laughter and cheers erupted around the table as glasses clinked. Beth felt a wave of affection for these women who'd become her chosen family, each with her own story of struggle and resilience, each finding in their friendship a kind of unconditional support that many had never experienced before. Later, as they walked along the moonlit harbor, Susan linked her arm through Beth's. "You know, when my husband died, I thought my life was essentially over. Just a matter of existing until I joined him. I never imagined all this." Beth nodded, understanding completely. "I spent most of my life trying to earn love through sacrifice. It never occurred to me that there might be people who would value me simply for who I am." "Well, get used to it," Susan said firmly, "because there are a lot of us now." When Beth arrived home that night, she found a small package on her doorstep. Inside was a framed photograph of Ethan in his graduation robes standing proudly beside her. The inscription read, "To the woman who taught me that true strength lies in knowing your own worth. Love always, Ethan." Beth placed the photograph on her mantel alongside other treasures she'd collected over the past 3 years. An award from the Governor's Commission on Elder Affairs, a handmade thank you card from Dorothy, the ceremonial pen from today's bill signing. Tokens of a life she'd never imagined for herself, but which now felt more authentic than anything that had come before.